Okay, let's look at this coordinate graph. So you need to familiarize yourself with the following concepts. This one, this area is known as quadrant 1. Okay. This area is known as quadrant 2. Then we have this area, which would be quadrant 3. And then finally, we have this area, which would be known as quadrant 4. Okay, so these are the 4 quadrants. So teachers might refer to the coordinates on quadrant 3. Then you need to know, okay, they're talking about this area. The second thing you need to know is you have 2 axes. This is considered your y-axis, which is also known as the vertical axis. Okay, vertical axis just meaning going up. And then we have our horizontal axis. Our horizontal axis, which is known as my x-axis. Now these things are very important for, let's say we want to graph some functions and they ask you to find the vertical asymptote. You need to know that it's something that's going to go up, and the horizontal asymptote would be something that lies flat. So it might be better to just familiarize yourself with these terms. Let's go to the next part. This is obviously also very important for trigonometry. Okay, so now we know we have our y-axis and we have our x-axis. Now what exactly is on my y and my x-axis? Why do we even have them? Well, on them is a bunch of numbers. So you have, these would be your horizontal positive values. So we can write, these are our positive values. And these values would be my negative values. So how do I know where's my positive and negative values? Well, we can look at the origin of the coordinate graph. This would be known as the origin. Origin of the coordinate graph, or coordinate plane, or x and y system. It goes by many names. Okay, I like to use the word x and y system. So the origin just means, where does it start? Well, we can see it starts at some point and then goes up, goes right, goes left, and goes down. So that's an easy way to find the origin. So questions might be, how far is this point from the origin? Or from the origin, sketch the following function, and etc. So now that we know what's an origin, let's look at our vertical positive values. Our vertical positive values would just be all the values that goes up from the origin, and the negative values will be that goes down from the origin. So these are my negative values and these are my positive values. Now, let's say we want to actually sketch one. On the x and y plane, you'll be given a couple of tasks, usually some functions that you need to input, or some graphs or rays or segments you need to sketch. So let's go add in some values. Let's go to 4. Let's go to 4, 4, 4. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. Now, what would be some very basic questions? Well, one of the most basic questions would be to plot this. Plot 3, 4. So how do we plot 3, 4? Well, we need to know that first in our parentheses is my x coordinate, and second in my parentheses is my y coordinate. So this one is x, this one is y. So all you need to do is you need to go find 3 on my x and 4 on my y. So how do I do that? Well, I go 3 slots to the right. There's my 0, 3. Now, a very common mistake is to make a point here and then that's my coordinate. No, we want to plot, or we want to connect our x and our y at the same point. So let's go to y, or to x, where x is 3. So I'm going to go find 3. 3 is over there. And then y, where y is 4, I can go up all the way to 4. So that's the point 3, 4. Let's do another example. Let's say -1, 3. We know that my x is -1, my y coordinate is 3. This is called a coordinate pair. A coordinate pair, okay? Which just means it's like a pair of shoes, you know, your left shoe and your right shoe. Now you have an x and a y, which makes a coordinate pair. So let's go find my x, where x is -1, x is -1 over there. And then we're going to go all the way to 3. So let's go all the way up to 3. So there we have our point. Let's do one more example. Let's say we have 1, -2. I'm going to go find 1, which is over there. I'm going to walk down all the way to 2. And there I found my coordinate, or I plotted my coordinate pair. Now you might be asked to link these pairs somehow, like this, and then you completed the instructions. So that's basic questions when it comes to coordinate graph. Now there's some things you need to be familiar with. You need to be familiar with where we have a closed point, a line, a closed point. This is called a segment. Okay, a segment. Then you have a closed point that follows with an arrow. Okay, this one is called a ray. We'll investigate what this means in a second. Then we have 2 arrows at the end. This one is called a line. Now, how do we know what's the difference between a segment, ray, and a line? Because they all 3 look the same. The important thing is to note that here we have some starting point. We have a starting point, and then we have an end point. With the ray, we have some starting point, and we have no endpoint. So what this means in terms of 2-dimensional geometry, this is what we're busy with now, 2-dimensional geometry. Okay, it just means 2D, which in this case is just going to be up and down and left and right. Okay, that's 2-dimensional. Or you can just think about it as x and y. You have 3-dimensional, where it's x, y, and z, but we'll get to that in another video. So what this no point means, it just means that it will go on forever and forever and forever. Okay, forever. It will never stop. This arrow means that it will never stop. And we can assign a mathematical notation to this to say, well, it goes up until infinity. Okay, infinity just means it never ends. Never ends. In an ideal world, of course, or in an abstract world, it never ends. Now for a line, we can see, well, there's no starting point. There's no starting point. And there's also no end point. Which means my line goes from all the way to infinity through negative infinity. So it goes from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. Now, once you start getting a little bit better at mathematics, you will sort of see this type of equation, or where you have the distance between negative infinity and positive infinity. Again, this is an opinion-based question. My opinion is not really the same as what I'm going to explain, but you have this point where all the negative integers and the positive integers are equal to infinity. And this concept is called cardinality. Now, one thing that's important is that whenever you sketch, at least in a high school level, up until maybe grade 11 or grade 12, you want to sketch, or you want to give your points integer values. Integer values. Okay, so what is an integer? Well, an integer, to put it simply, is just a number. You can think about it as a number on a number line. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So an integer is a value that is not, just to put it simple, it's not a decimal value and it's not a fraction. So it's just a number, like a nicely written number. So what is a decimal? A decimal is a value that has some point next to it, some point to show there's some value remaining. A fraction is something that looks like this, 7/6, which would just translate to some decimal. It will just translate to some decimal. No, that's not true. That's going to be 5 points, or maybe 5.6 or something. So we want to always assign integers, at least at a basic level, to our coordinate plane. And the mathematical notation for an integer is a z. Okay? Now you can have a z with a plus sign over here, and you can have a z with a negative sign over here, which means these are your positive integers, and these ones will be your negative integers. So once you understand the basic terminology, sorry about that. Once you understand the basic terminology of a coordinate plane, now this thing also has a whole bunch of different names. Let's go through the names quick, depending on who's your teacher. So I'm specifically talking about the axis now. You should know that the axis is this. No. Let me do it somewhere else. Let me go find some space. Okay. Here we go. So this is my y, this is my x. We know this is my positive y, positive x, positive y, negative y. So we can actually assign to our quadrants. Maybe I can quickly run through this as well. This might be a little bit tricky, but if you can somehow notice this without me telling you, that's fantastic. If you cannot, it's totally fine. You have time. You have time to pass mathematics. Okay? There's always time to learn. So we know now that this is the origin. So if I look at my x, I'm going to quickly redo this. X, y coordinate. In this case, while my y is positive and my x is positive, so my quadrant 1 coordinates will be positive, positive. If I go to quadrant 2, I know that my x is negative and my y is positive, so my quadrant 2 coordinates would be negative, positive. If I go to quadrant 3, I have negative x and negative y. And in my fourth quadrant, I have negative or positive x, look, positive x, but negative y. So if you're given some coordinates, let's say negative 2, negative 4, well, you know, whoa, wait a minute, my quadrant 3 coordinates are negative, negative, so my coordinates should be in this region, my quadrant 3 region. Just a little tip. Anyway, let's go back to the names. Okay, the names. So for now I have to draw a new one. So this thing goes by many names. It goes by an x and y system. Okay, so one I like to use. It sounds a little bit technical. X and y system. So let's say x and y system. It also has the name coordinate plane, which also has the name Cartesian plane, Some people call it a coordinate graph. I've heard that before. So you have X and Y system, coordinate plane, Cartesian plane, coordinate graph. What else did they talk about? Yeah, that's pretty much coordinate plane, coordinate graph, Cartesian plane, Cartesian graph. I've never heard Cartesian graph, but these are some of the names that people use to identify. Hey, I made a mistake. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. You see, even as an educator, I made a little mistake, which is fine. I mean, it's not really fine, but you know, we all make mistakes. We're human. So, so in this case, these are the names that this thing goes by. So you might hear me saying X and Y system, but then you hear somebody else says a coordinate plane or a Cartesian plane. So just be aware of that point. Anyway, this was chapter 1.1 of coordinate terminology, and I'll continue making this series.